Everybody. I know I'm in a difficult panel because at the same time, whilst I'm seated as a co-panelist, I'll probably also be the one on whom anything that has to be targeted as a representative of the government is also going to be hit at. So I'll have to take both. I'm quite glad to do that. First, let me thank the organizers to have thought it fit to have me on this panel, which is of eminent speakers. Professor Gautam Sen himself is somebody who's an authority on this topic. I mean, the topic seems to be different for each one of us panelists. However, on the Indian economy revival and the historic strengths and challenges that we face are all issues on which Gautam Sen can, who I've had the fortune of knowing for now more than 20 years. During a short stay in UK, we've had some good times with Professor Sen, so I value that exchange. Today, of course, talking on the particular topic of propelling the Indian economy, and also being here as somebody who's dealing with commerce in India, I would like to keep the tone of the few things that I would want to exchange with you very much in line with what Vivek has spoken. I think we are at a cusp of history where you have a clear-headed government, a government which has got a mandate which gives it the strength with which it can move forward. Of course, a mandate which also makes it responsible for such changes, which is going to reflect the true Indian economy. It has to be a mandate rightly used. I hate to use the word protect because I think that's very patronizing, particularly of the segments that I want to talk about. Because India has been historically, over the millennia, stood at the economic forefront, which many of us may want to disbelieve because we are so used to the churned data which comes to us. But India has always stood at the forefront of economic achievements on two values which it held very dear. It has held it dear because it's come over the generation, time tested, we've proved our ability, and therefore I have reduced it to two. You may want to expand it to many more. Two things. One, your entrepreneurship, small, medium, whoever, every individual was made to do things, perform, show, and then contribute to the society. Society, largely both economic and, as in a society, the sociological side of it. The other is because we were so family-centric, and families always ensured themselves for a future, without knowing, you little by little, like the ant, the proverbial ant, or like the birds which, take care of themselves, you saved. So the inherent strength that Indian economy, knowingly or unknowingly, over the centuries built itself are two things: your entrepreneurship and your power to save. These were the two virtues with which every, tranche of historically observed periods, well before the British, well before any industrial revolution took place in Europe, you always had individuals struggling, individuals working together, individuals setting a target, individuals performing, and therefore you had multitude of these individuals performing, contributing to an economy, which was free, which was, it was like the free-range hen, which is healthy, which goes around looking for its own food, it performs and it stays healthy. But you don't notice it like the way you notice these broiler chicken which are being, grown in a large-scale poultry farm. But these are free-range. They did fend for themselves and they catered, they were surviving, they were performing, and they were healthy. The other is because of the value system, you also knew the virtue that you had to take care of your own self, and therefore you saved and saved and saved. So this entrepreneurship together with the small saving has always been the backbone of Indian economy. And even today, even after 1947, in a very quiet kind of way, it is these two things which have stood up for any challenge. In spite of the socialist India between 47 and nearly late 80s, in spite of the regulatory framework that we had, in spite of all the kind of license quota raj which helped, the socialist top-down kind of a, we know what to command, the command structure was given, how much of rice you would grow, how much of this you would sell, and at what price you would sell. It was continuously surviving quietly without being noticed, but at the same time not stealthily. It lived its legitimate life, and that savings, that small savings quality remained at 36% kind of a level, 36, 37, 38% level, which unfortunately during the end of this last government which was voted out, it came down to 29.9% level, probably even lesser. As a result, the economy's one big strength, which was small savings, really petered down, contributing and adding to the problem. On the other hand, all the 40, 50 years when the small entrepreneur or the medium-sized entrepreneur was not being able to perform at his full best, he was just surviving. You saw the moment the globalization, the opening up happened, the economy was getting deregularized, the license quota raj was dwindling, these revived, and there was hope. However, the bad policy of the last government, lack of policy of the last government, or even the policy paralysis of the last government, resulted again in that revival which was being seen of the small and medium and generally of the entrepreneurship of India. Again, this cloud was cast over it, saying, will it survive? Can it survive? What will happen now? With that broadish background, what I'm talking about in terms of the cusp that I started telling you at the beginning is we are now at a stage where you want to give encouragement for the small savings. You want to ensure that the entrepreneurship is back again at its best, small, medium, or large, but devoid of the baggage of the socialist era, devoid of the baggage which made you always be the suspect end of the story. You don't pay your tax, you don't do anything legal, you are not investing the right kind of money, your entrepreneurship is really at the government's patronage. So that cloud has to be removed, and this government, I can assure you, is taking every such a step to ensure that the trust is put back to the people, small entrepreneurship, medium, large scale. At the same time, that biting inflation, which did not permit families to save, because everything that was being saved is also going into the more expensive essentials that you had to buy. So controlling inflation, although of course the interest rate is another story about which I can talk separately. So what is the cusp in which we are? We are at a cusp with a very clear-headed government which is trying to remove the license quota permit raj which was eating into our strengths, and at the same time being sure that the floodgates are not opened in such a way that the entrepreneurship which was struggling and which is now showing potential to bloom to the fullest is not getting washed out because the floodgates are opened. So it is a very, very careful and balancing act that this government is engaging in. And few of the nuggets which I would just like to throw here or raise as issues, I'll flag them off because that will give you the broader picture of what I'm trying to present before you without, of course, taking much of a time, is in most of the negotiations, in most of the situations where we try to understand the economies abroad, we find, much to a pleasant surprise, that the investment that the Indian entrepreneur has made abroad sometimes is even more than the investment of that country in India. This is true of very many developed countries like Canada, UK. And would you believe it that when you're sitting in the negotiation, you're able to tell them, Our entrepreneurs have invested far more in your country, generating far more employment than you advanced economies are coming and doing in India, which Vivek Debroy pointed out. So today, the negotiations that we have with countries, I take the point where Vivek says that you should, trade data should also be released by you to say how much of tariff barriers exists in those countries. Point well taken. But in a very non-adversarial way, we are able to convince economies abroad, which are today reeling in less than 1% growth, less than 1% growth in most of the countries in Europe. We are able to tell them today that, hey, look at your economy. We are inviting more investments from you because we want to have Make in India succeed. And for those goods which you're able to find market here, would you want to come and invest here, produce here, give us jobs and sell them here because you already have found a market? And that they should do, all the more because our investments in those countries are already so much more. Australia, I can add it on to the list which I said earlier. Our investments are much more than their investments in India. And this from a country which today gracefully is being called emerging. Like Vivek said earlier, because it was so, full of lack of etiquette to call you as underdeveloped, and therefore you've been addressed as developing country. Today we are an emerging country, but who invested far more in other countries. So that's one thing which we are conscious, and I, with a certain sense of pride and sometimes with a chip on my shoulder, not really, but chip on my shoulder, say, oh my God, we've invested lots more in your country. Would you want to look at it and come back to us? So it gives you a great sense of, the different India which you represent now, and not the India in which at least I grew up, where you were, wondering when are the golden days going to come? When are you going to be able to assert your strengths? So that's one thing which I'd like to point out. All right, if Indian entrepreneurs went abroad, invested abroad, are we just basking in that glory? I'll also tell you, which I'm sure majority of you being top business leaders in your own respective countries will know, we are setting standards of quality. We are setting standards of quality in some particular sectors where the kind of international competitiveness we've reached are absolutely stunning, and they are self-propelled. For instance, in pharmaceutical in India, in production of generic drugs in India, we are much better than the most well-known countries, and we have set standards, and our laws are far more robust than laws which prevail elsewhere in any part of the world. And as a result of which, when Indian courts are approached on copyright or any other issue, you find Indian judiciary also standing up to the challenge to tell that our laws are far more progressive in protecting the right of generic drug manufacturers, which is opening up a lot of, gates for better medical practices in lesser, developed countries. And in Africa, people are looking at us to say, oh my God, if that is the way in which cheap goods can be produced, cheap medicinal products can be produced, it is going to help really people who desperately need that kind of help. Again, standards. And that's so not just in pharmaceutical, it's also so in automobiles, engineering goods, in sectors where some of the Western economies have been telling us about they stand for superb quality in engineering. Today, we are giving a run for their money. Similarly, in producing cost-effective goods, I find many of our small-scale units are giving such wonderful pricing that many producers abroad today feel it better that they should come to India to produce it rather than remain in a cost-ineffective economy. So cost effectiveness is becoming one of the virtues of Indian economy, and therefore that will be a very important instrument to propel our economy even faster on a greater big trajectory. Then I'm quickly going down so that the various important flag points are highlighted. Services. Today we are really enviably good at services and services enabled, IT enabled, and also other services related to non-IT activities. Medical and healthcare, wellness. We are able to do wonderfully in logistics. And therefore, when you're talking of service-related things, that is why you find, when you're talking about countries having non-tariff barriers or questions about, not enabling your Bibek's point of, why don't we tell them how much they are obstructionist or blocking our own strengths from reaching them. It's not just goods. Finding market for goods is one thing. Today, finding market for services, meaning markets exist, but you're not able to cut across the barriers and reach with your service sector's strengths. Within India, service sector nearly contributes 50-58% to our GDP. As it is overtaken many of the sectors. Whether that is completely healthy or not is a different debate. But services also is an area in which we are able to make big difference. We are, in fact, talking to most institutions, whether it's IMF, World Bank, whether it is the G20, which is not a forum of a certain standing as much as when you talk about World Bank or IMF. But in most of these institutions, our voice is not just heard, but taken very seriously. Otherwise, without being like in July, being pointed out that you're alone, you're singularly left alone, you're a breaker of a deal, and so on, as we were talking about WTO, we wouldn't have reached a stage where we can, say we are closer to a solution and we probably will get over the impasse. It's only because you're able to, as a country, stand up with strength, argue with substance, and negotiate with equal right and being at par. You're not talking to them as one less. And that's because of the kind of leadership with which you're able to project India. And that is a very big difference. It makes you to be taken seriously. I've experienced it personally, and therefore I'm here to tell you that India is now not just seeking the high table, it is being invited to the high table. Only because even if you think it's a bit of an exaggeration, I will underline this to say that the sagging European economies, the sagging North American economies, in spite of, and this notwithstanding America saying that it is probably reviving better, depend on emerging economies for solutions, depend on emerging economies like India. I'm purposely differentiating India from China, for solutions to revive their economies. It is not as if we want investment because, oh my God, my youngsters are without jobs. We will find jobs. But for reviving their economies, for opportunities to get solution to their economies, for their exports which are not lifting at all, they need India. They need Indian market. They need the Indian buyer. And therefore, propelling your economy, I'm coming back to the topic, propelling your Indian economy has to be consciously done because you have the demand, you have the purchasing power. Of course, a bulk of our Indian population is still requiring hand-holding and help, but overall your Indian economy is now coming up with both opportunity for investment, opportunity for marketing, and opportunity also as one of the very important component for value chain in any area of production. The Prime Minister has been talking about the 5 T's: tradition, talent, technology, tourism, and trade. I want to underline here something which I'm consciously bringing into this debate. Tradition and talent have always kept our master craftsmen, our traditional artisans, our small traders, our particular USP in producing handcrafted goods and so on, always as one of the backbone, the entrepreneurial backbone. But I find it sometimes very, very discouraging that when you're talking about reviving Indian economy, you have these wonderful experts who come and do PowerPoint presentation, tell you solutions about how to go about building corridors, engineering marvel at airports, seaports, and linking multimodal transport and so on. My grievance has been just one thing. They would tell you where you want a smart city, where you want IT special hubs, They would want to tell you where you have to have a, completely 21st century kind of a city and so on. But I have not found them telling us what to do with our artisans. I have not found them telling us, India's USP has been this. How would you want them to be part of this wonderful 21st century India that we want to build? Most of them, when you challenge them with questions about, very well, but Indian handicrafts, for instance, Indian artisans who are producing a certain kind of a, particular metalware, or your weavers, who in every state have 3 or 4 different varieties of wonderfully, woven clothes. What is their prospects in this wonderful digitized city that we are going to build? No. Unless you ask them, unless you put them on the job, there is no natural understanding to, subsume that set of your population, very vital for our Indian economy. We are bringing that consciously into the scheme of things that we are talking about. We are not ignoring them. On the contrary, we are intervening into those systems to say, where is the place for them? The other thing which I want to consciously bring into this debate here is the tax structure that we have in India. We are trying to do everything to simplify it so that it becomes taxpayer friendly, user friendly, make it less adversarial, and ensure, this is the difficult part, but ensure that family is not incentivized. It shouldn't become so individual tax specific that eventually you're taxing every individual within a family, but the family as a whole tends to lose. So we are trying to see how best we nurture family, we ensure that the tax structure is not going to be a disincentive for being in a family, but at the same time, what is the best way to take that tax, as would, Prime Minister, and also deriving from Arthashastra, we've said you're going to sit like a bee on the flower, but not really so heavily as to even crush the flower down. So we are working to make it as simple and effortless. And the final point, which I'll definitely bring into this debate, is just as I was talking about all the perspective plans the smart cities or anybody would have, without our artisans, where we are deliberately trying to bring them in, we are also saying the small traders, the fellow who's push cart holder, the basket full load of vegetable carrying woman, are they being financially included? They are the ones actually who have taken good, bad, efficient, inefficient, like or don't like. They are the ones who've kept up the backbone of retail in India. They have just done it effortlessly from the field straight to the, consumer. But they've never been given an institutional support. You have the middlemen who will probably lend them 90 rupees when they ask for 100, keeping the 10 rupee with them. And in the evening, they come back to pay 100 rupees back to the middleman saying, here's the money, I'll come back to you tomorrow, my trade for today is over. These are people who have been completely kept out of our financial structure. So the Jan Dhan Yojana, with which the Prime Minister has given an account for every individual, an account where you don't have money at all at the moment, maybe gradually they will start getting money either through the direct cash transfer, the DBT as would popularly be known, or when they improve on their businesses, they are able to get some money into their accounts. We are looking at the way in which institutionally these people can be brought into a certain credit line so that their daily business, which involves very small advances required, are also given that benefit. I wouldn't want to take more of your time. There are so many such interventions with which we are trying to make Indian economy propelled with its usual, typical, and generation-wise tested strengths. We are making an effort to ensure that those who have kept up the Indian economy, even in troubled times, are not forgotten. And above all, I think we take it as a duty that this Indian economy's propulsion has to be from the people themselves, not from top down. So with all this, and of course, I've not mentioned the one little thing about agriculture, where severe underemployment exists. It is our task to have that surplus labor, which is underemployed, underutilized, be brought out, and in some way with skill development be brought into the other streams of activity where they can generate more. So these are ways in which I suppose the government is trying to propel the economy. The topic is that which is given to me, so I just try to give you examples of what we are doing. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and thank all of you who have given me a patient hearing.